The rain came down in sheets so heavy that Dorothy Jenkins could barely see the empty road ahead. Her white lace dress clinging to her shivering body like a second skin, as she stood alone outside the small chapel in San Angelo, Texas, wondering how her life had fallen apart so completely in the span of a single morning. The guests had filtered out slowly at first, murmuring sympathetic words she could not hear over the roaring in her ears, then faster as the storm rolled in, until she was left standing there like a fool, bouquet still clutched in her trembling hands, staring at the spot where Thomas Carver had promised to meet her just 2 hours before. She had known Thomas since she was 16, had agreed to marry him on her 19th birthday, and now at 22 she stood abandoned, the carefully planned future she had built in her mind crumbling like sun-dried clay in a flash flood. Her father had passed 3 years ago, her mother following him 6 months later from what the doctor called a broken heart, but what Dorothy suspected was simply the consumption that had plagued her for years. She had no siblings, no close family except for her aunt in Dallas, who had made it clear that Dorothy was only welcome as long as she was married and respectable. The chapel door opened behind her and Reverend Matthews stepped out, his face creased with concern as he held an umbrella that did little against the driving rain. "Miss Jenkins, you cannot stand out here. You will catch your death. Please, come inside and we will figure out what to do." Dorothy shook her head, water streaming from her hair that she had spent hours pinning up that morning, now hanging in wet ropes against her neck. "I cannot go back in there. Everyone saw. Everyone knows he did not want me." "That boy is a fool," the Reverend said firmly. "Any man who would leave a woman like you waiting is not worth your tears." But the tears came anyway, hot against her cold cheeks, mixing with the rain until she could not tell the difference. She had invested 3 years of her life waiting for Thomas to save enough money to buy the ranch he wanted. She had sewn her own dress, had planned every detail of their wedding breakfast, had imagined the children they would have and the life they would build together. And he had simply not shown up. No message, no explanation, just emptiness where her future should have been. The Reverend tried again to coax her inside, but Dorothy could not bear the thought of facing those pitying looks, of walking back through that chapel where she was supposed to have become a wife, and instead became an object of gossip that would follow her for years in this small town. She could hear them already, the whispers about poor Dorothy Jenkins, left standing at the altar. What must be wrong with her that her own fiancé would run off rather than marry her? "I need to be alone," she said, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Please, Reverend Matthews, just let me be." He hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and compassion, then nodded slowly. "I will be inside if you need anything, anything at all." He retreated into the chapel, leaving her alone in the downpour. Dorothy stood there as the rain soaked through to her skin, as her carefully curled hair went limp and straight, as the bouquet of wildflowers she had picked herself that morning drooped and died in her hands. She felt hollowed out, like someone had taken a spoon and scraped away everything inside her that mattered, leaving only an empty shell in a ruined dress. She was not sure how long she stood there before she heard the sound of hoofbeats. At first she thought she imagined them, but they grew louder closer, until a horse and rider emerged from the gray curtain of rain. The man sat tall in the saddle, his hat pulled low against the storm, his dark coat slick with water. He slowed as he approached the chapel, then stopped entirely when he saw her standing there. For a long moment, he just looked at her, and she looked back, too numb to feel embarrassed or afraid. Then he swung down from his horse with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle and walked toward her, leading his mount by the reins. "Miss, "You are going to freeze to death out here," he said, his voice low and rough, accented with something she could not quite place. "Not Texas, maybe Colorado or Wyoming. That does not look like the kind of weather for a garden party." Despite everything, despite the grief crushing her chest and the humiliation burning in her throat, Dorothy felt a strange bubble of laughter rise up. It came out as something between a sob and a giggle. "No, I suppose it is not." He was closer now, close enough that she could see his face beneath the brim of his hat. He looked to be in his mid-20s, with strong features made harsh by weather and sun, a few days of stubble on his jaw, and eyes that were an unexpected shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds breaking. There was a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, old and faded, and his nose looked like it had been broken at least once. "I am going to hazard a guess that today did not go the way you planned," he said, something almost gentle in his rough voice. "Your guess would be correct." Dorothy looked down at her ruined dress, at the mud splattered on the hem, at the wilted flowers still clutched in her hand. "I was supposed to get married." "Was," he repeated, catching the past tense. He glanced around at the empty space in front of the chapel, then back at her. "The groom did not show up." Saying it out loud made it real in a way it had not been before, and Dorothy felt fresh tears threaten. She blinked them back furiously. She had already cried enough for one day, for one lifetime. The man was quiet for a moment, then he did something unexpected. He took off his coat and draped it around her shoulders. It was wet on the outside but held the warmth of his body on the inside, and Dorothy clutched it gratefully, shivering so hard her teeth chattered. "That coat is probably worth more than kindness to a stranger," she said. "I have another. You, on the other hand, look like you might blow away in this wind." He studied her for another long moment, then said something that would change the entire course of her life. "Come with me." Dorothy stared at him. "What?" "Come with me," he repeated, as calm as if he was asking her opinion on the weather. "You are standing in the rain in a wedding dress with nowhere to go. I am guessing the man who left you here was your plan for the future, so make a new plan. Come with me. I do not even know you." But even as she said it, Dorothy felt something shift inside her, something that might have been hope or might have been desperation, or might have been the simple human need to believe that this day could be salvaged somehow. "My name is Lucas Kane. I am from Colorado originally. Been working as a ranch hand and drover for the last 8 years, and I am currently on my way to a job in Del Rio. I am 26 years old, I do not drink to excess, I have never struck a woman, and I have a fair bit of money saved because I have nothing much to spend it on." He paused. "That is more than you knew about your groom, I would wager, and he left you in the rain." Dorothy could not argue with that logic. She had known Thomas for years, true, but had she really known him? Known what he thought in the dark of night, what he wanted from life beyond that ranch, whether he truly loved her or just saw her as a convenient wife? Apparently not, since she had never guessed he would abandon her on their wedding day. "Why would you ask a complete stranger to come with you?" she asked. Lucas Kane looked at her steadily. "Because you look like you need someone to ask. And because I have been alone for a long time, and I am tired of it. And because—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "Because I looked at you standing here in the rain and I thought, there is a woman who is brave enough to stand in a storm rather than face the people who pitied her. That is the kind of bravery I respect. That is not bravery, that is stubbornness and pride. Same thing sometimes." He held out his hand. "I am not asking you to marry me. I am not asking for anything except your company on the road. If you get to Del Rio and you want to go your own way, you can. No obligations, but at least you will not be here in this place with these memories." Dorothy looked at his outstretched hand. It was calloused and scarred, the hand of a man who worked hard for his living. She looked at the chapel behind her, at the door that led back to sympathy and whispers, and the long, slow death of becoming the spinster who was left at the altar. She looked down at her ruined dress, at the symbol of dreams that would never come true. Then she took his hand. Lucas Kane's grip was firm and warm despite the rain. He helped her up onto his horse, a sturdy bay gelding with kind eyes, then swung up behind her. Dorothy had never been this close to a man who was not Thomas. And even with Thomas, she had always maintained the proper distance that society demanded. But there was nothing proper about this, about running away with a stranger in the rain, and Dorothy found she did not care. "Hold on," Lucas said, his voice close to her ear, and then they were moving, the horses' hoofbeats loud against the muddy ground as they left the chapel and San Angelo behind. They rode hard through the storm, Dorothy clinging to the saddle horn as Lucas guided the horse with the ease of long practice. The rain began to let up after about an hour, fading to a drizzle, and then stopping altogether as the clouds broke apart to reveal a pale afternoon sun. Dorothy was soaked to the bone, exhausted, and had no idea what she was doing or where she was going. But for the first time since she had woken up that morning with butterflies in her stomach and hope in her heart, she felt like she could breathe. Lucas did not push the horse too hard, and after another hour he slowed to a walk, then stopped near a grove of pecan trees where the ground was relatively dry. He dismounted and helped Dorothy down, his hand steady on her waist. Her legs nearly gave out when her feet hit the ground and he caught her, holding her upright until she found her balance. "You need to get out of that wet dress," he said, then immediately added, "I have dry clothes in my saddlebag. They will be too big but better than what you are wearing." Dorothy nodded, too cold and tired to be embarrassed. Lucas pulled a bundle from his saddlebag and handed it to her, then turned his back and walked a discreet distance away to tend to his horse. Dorothy changed quickly behind one of the larger trees, peeling off the sodden wedding dress and leaving it in a heap on the ground. She felt a pang looking at it, at the hours of work it represented, but she could not bring herself to care enough to pick it up. The clothes Lucas had given her were indeed too big, a worn cotton shirt and trousers that she had to roll up several times at the ankles and wrists. She had never worn trousers in her life and felt strange in them, exposed and immodest, but she had to admit they were warmer than the dress had been. When she emerged from behind the tree, Lucas had built a small fire and was laying out a blanket from his pack. He glanced up at her, his expression unreadable, then nodded. "Better. Come sit by the fire and warm up." Dorothy obeyed, sinking down onto the blanket with a sigh. The heat from the fire felt glorious against her chilled skin. Lucas sat across from her and pulled out some jerky and hardtack from his saddlebag, offering her half. She took it, suddenly aware that she had not eaten since early that morning. They ate in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional whinny from the horse. Finally, Lucas spoke. "You can still change your mind. We are only a few hours from San Angelo. I can take you back if you want." Dorothy thought about it, really thought about it. Going back would be the sensible thing, the proper thing. She could apologize to the Reverend, face down the gossip, maybe write to her aunt in Dallas and throw herself on her mercy. She could try to rebuild the life she had planned, even without Thomas in it. But the thought made her feel tired in a way that went bone deep. "No," she said, "I do not want to go back." Lucas nodded as if this was the answer he expected. "Then we will keep going. Del Rio is about a week's ride from here, maybe more depending on the weather and how fast we travel. I have enough supplies for 2 if we are careful." "What kind of job are you going to in Del Rio?" "Working on a ranch, managing cattle. The owner, man named Patterson, offered me foreman position if I could get there by the end of the month. Good pay, steady work. He poked at the fire with a stick. I have been moving around for years, never staying in one place long. Figured it was time to settle down somewhere. Why were you in San Angelo? Just passing through on my way south. I stopped to wait out the storm, saw the chapel, saw you. He looked up at her. Seemed like fate, maybe. Dorothy did not believe in fate. She believed in hard work and planning and building the life you wanted through determination and effort. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe she had been so busy planning that she had forgotten to actually live. Tell me about Colorado, she said. So he did. As the sun set and the fire burned low, Lucas told her about growing up in the mountains, about his father who had been a trapper and his mother who had died when he was young. He told her about learning to ride before he could walk, about working cattle drives and sleeping under the stars, about seeing most of the West from Montana to Mexico. His voice was low and steady, and Dorothy found herself relaxing as she listened, the disaster of the day fading into something distant and unreal. When it grew too dark to see without the fire, Lucas stood and stamped out the flames. We should get some sleep. I want to make good time tomorrow. He laid out his bedroll and another blanket, creating two separate sleeping spaces with careful propriety. Dorothy lay down, the ground hard beneath her back, and stared up at the stars. There were so many of them out here, away from town, more than she had ever seen in her life. They looked close enough to touch. Lucas, she said quietly. Yes, thank you for stopping, for asking me to come with you. There was a pause, then his voice came out of the darkness. You are welcome, Dorothy Jenkins. She smiled despite everything and closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling her down into sleep. They fell into a rhythm over the next few days. Lucas would wake her at dawn and they would ride until midday, stopping to rest the horse and eat whatever they had on hand. Then they would ride again until evening, making camp wherever they could find shelter and water. The weather stayed clear, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed to stretch forever in all directions. Dorothy had never been away from town before, had never spent a night sleeping on the ground or a day in the saddle. Her muscles ached, her skin burned from the sun, and she was fairly certain she had blisters on blisters from riding. But she also felt more alive than she had in years. Out here, there were no expectations, no one watching to make sure she behaved correctly, no future laid out in careful steps she was supposed to follow. There was just the land and the sky and the steady presence of the man riding beside her. Lucas was easy company, she discovered. He did not talk much, but when he did, it was always something worth hearing. He taught her how to properly sit a horse so she would not be as sore, how to read the weather by watching the clouds, how to tell direction by the position of the sun. He never asked prying questions about Thomas or her past, never made her feel like she had to explain or justify her decision to leave. On the third day, they stopped in a small town called El Dorado to buy supplies. Dorothy waited with the horse while Lucas went into the general store, acutely aware of how she must look in her borrowed men's clothes, her hair tied back with a piece of string. A few people stared as they passed, and she heard whispered words she tried to ignore. Lucas came back with flour, coffee, some canned goods, and a package wrapped in brown paper that he handed to her. For you. Dorothy opened it to find a simple cotton dress in pale green, a shawl, and a pair of practical boots that looked about her size. She looked up at him, surprised and touched. You did not have to do this. I know, but I thought you might want something that fits properly. The trousers are practical for riding, but... He shrugged, looking slightly uncomfortable. I thought you might like the choice. It was a small thing, but it meant the world. Dorothy clutched the package to her chest and smiled at him, a real smile, the first one since the wedding that was not. "Thank you." Something shifted in his expression, softening the hard edges. "You are welcome." That night, wearing her new dress and sitting by another campfire, Dorothy found herself studying Lucas in the flickering light. He was handsome in a rough way, she supposed, though that was not what drew her attention. It was the way he moved with quiet confidence, the way he seemed completely at ease under the vast Texas sky, the way he treated her with respect and kindness, without expecting anything in return. She thought about Thomas, about the future she had planned with him, and was shocked to realize she felt nothing. No anger, no grief, just a sort of distant bewilderment that she had ever thought that was what she wanted. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, noticing her stare. "That I do not miss him," Dorothy said honestly. "Thomas, I mean. Should I not? I was supposed to marry him. I thought I loved him, but I have barely thought about him since we left San Angelo." Lucas considered this. "Maybe you loved the idea of him more than the reality. Or maybe you just loved having a plan, a future mapped out. People do that sometimes, confuse the idea of a person with who they really are." "That sounds like the voice of experience." "Maybe." He poked at the fire. "I was engaged once, long time ago. Girl named Sarah back in Colorado. I thought I loved her too, thought we would get married and buy a ranch and have a dozen kids." He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Then I found out she had been stepping out with the banker's son. Told me she was sorry, but he could give her a better life than her ranch hand ever could." "I am sorry." "Do not be. She was right in a way. She wanted security and comfort, and I wanted adventure and freedom. We would have made each other miserable." He looked up at Dorothy. "Sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you turns out to be the best thing. You just do not know it yet." Dorothy thought about that as she lay in her bedroll later, listening to the sounds of the night. Was this the best thing? Running away with a stranger, no plan, no idea what would happen when they reached Del Rio. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt more certain than she had in years. On the fifth day, they ran into trouble. They were riding through a stretch of rocky terrain when Lucas suddenly held up his hand, signaling Dorothy to stop. She obeyed immediately, her heart starting to pound. Up ahead, she could see 3 men on horseback blocking the road. Even from a distance, she could tell they were not friendly. "Stay behind me," Lucas said quietly, his hand moving to rest on the gun at his hip. The 3 men rode forward, spreading out to surround them. They were rough-looking, unshaven and dirty, with guns strapped to their sides and mean expressions on their faces. The one in the middle, a big man with a scar across his cheek, grinned unpleasantly. "Well, well, what do we have here? A cowboy and his lady friend. You two look like you might have some money to spare." "We do not want trouble," Lucas said, his voice steady and calm. "We are just passing through." "That is nice. But you see, we need money and you have it. So why not you just hand over whatever you have got, and we will let you go on your way." Dorothy's hands tightened on the reins. She could feel the tension radiating off Lucas, could see the calculation in his eyes as he sized up the 3 men. "I am going to say this once," Lucas said, his voice dropping into something cold and dangerous. "Ride away now and there will be no trouble. Push this and you will regret it." The big man laughed. "You hear that, boys? He is threatening us. 3 against 1, and he thinks he can win." 3 against 2, Dorothy said before she could stop herself. All eyes turned to her, and she lifted her chin, trying to look braver than she felt. "I will not let you hurt him." Lucas glanced back at her, something that might have been pride or exasperation or both in his expression. Then everything happened very fast. The big man reached for his gun, but Lucas was faster. His hand moved in a blur, and suddenly he was holding his pistol, The barrel pointed steadily at the man's chest. I said right away. The other two men reached for their weapons, but they hesitated when they saw Lucas had already drawn. The standoff stretched out, tense and dangerous, and Dorothy held her breath. Finally, the big man spat on the ground and lowered his hand. This is not worth dying over. Come on, boys. Let these fools go. They rode off, but not before throwing back looks that promised this was not over. Lucas did not holster his gun until they were out of sight, and even then he kept scanning the horizon. We need to move fast, he said. They might come back with reinforcements. They rode hard for the next several hours, not stopping until the sun began to set, and Lucas was satisfied they had put enough distance between themselves and the bandits. When they finally made camp, Dorothy was shaking, the fear she had held at bay during the confrontation finally catching up with her. Lucas noticed immediately. He came and sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. You did good back there. Stupid, but good. I could not let them hurt you. They probably would not have, but thank you for the thought. He was quiet for a moment, then added, You have got courage, Dorothy Jenkins. More than most. Dorothy leaned against him, seeking comfort in his solid presence. To her surprise, Lucas put his arm around her shoulders, holding her as the fear worked its way out of her system. They sat like that as the stars came out, and Dorothy realized with a start that she felt safe. Despite the bandits, despite being in the middle of nowhere with no plan, she felt safer than she ever had in her carefully ordered life in San Angelo. Lucas, she said softly. Yes, I am glad it was you who stopped at the chapel that day. I am glad it was you who asked me to come with you. She felt him tense beside her, then relax. His arm tightened around her shoulders. I am glad too. They reached Del Rio on a hot afternoon 8 days after leaving San Angelo. The town was larger than Dorothy expected, bustling with activity as ranchers and cowboys moved through the streets. Lucas led them to a hotel, one of the nicer ones based on the paint on the exterior, and helped Dorothy down from the horse. Wait here, he said. I will get us rooms. He came back a few minutes later with 2 keys. Second floor. I got you one with a real bed and a bath. Figure you have earned it after a week of sleeping on the ground. Dorothy took the key gratefully, suddenly aware of how dirty and tired she was. What about you? Right next door. I need to go meet with Patterson, tell him I made it in time for the job. Will you be all right here for a few hours? Dorothy nodded. I will be fine. She watched him walk away, leading his horse toward what she assumed was a stable, and felt a strange pang in her chest. They had been together constantly for over a week, and now the thought of being separated even for a few hours felt wrong somehow. The hotel room was simple but clean, with a real bed that looked like heaven after nights on the ground. Dorothy drew herself a bath, scrubbing away layers of trail dust and feeling halfway human again. She put on the green dress Lucas had bought her, brushed out her hair until it gleamed, and looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. The woman looking back at her was different from the one who had stood in the rain outside that chapel. She was thinner, sunburned, with new lines around her eyes from squinting in the sun. But she also looked alive in a way she never had before, her eyes bright, and her expression no longer carefully schooled into polite pleasantness. She thought about Thomas Carver and tried to summon some feeling, anger or hurt or even curiosity about why he had abandoned her. But there was nothing there, just a vague sense that she had dodged a bullet without knowing it. If he had shown up, she would have married him, would have lived a perfectly respectable life in San Angelo, and would never have known there was anything else. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Lucas standing there, cleaned up and wearing a fresh shirt, his hair still damp from his own bath. He looked different without the trail dust, younger and more handsome, and Dorothy felt her breath catch slightly. "I thought you might want some dinner," he said. "Patterson gave me an advance on my wages so we can actually eat something that is not jerky for once." Dorothy smiled. "That sounds wonderful." They ate at a restaurant down the street, a proper sit-down meal with roasted chicken and potatoes and fresh bread. Dorothy could not remember when food had tasted so good. Lucas told her about his meeting with Patterson, about the ranch and the job and the house that came with the foreman position. "It is small," he said. "Just 2 rooms, but it is solid and it has a real roof and a stove that works. Patterson said I can move in tomorrow." "That is wonderful," Dorothy said and meant it, but she also felt that pang again, sharper this time. Tomorrow Lucas would move into his house and start his new job, and she would be left here in this hotel with no plan, no future, no idea what came next. Lucas must have seen something in her expression because he reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused against hers. "Come with me." Dorothy looked up, startled. "What? To the house?" "Come with me." He paused, seeming to search for words. "I know we have not known each other long. I know this is probably crazy. But this past week, riding with you, talking with you, just being with you, it has been the best week I have had in years, maybe ever, and I do not want it to end." Dorothy's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "What are you asking?" "I am asking if you want to stay. If you want to see where this goes, whatever this is between us." He squeezed her hand gently. "No obligations. You will have your own room. If you decide it is not what you want, I will help you figure out what is. But please, Dorothy, stay." She should have said no. She should have pointed out that she barely knew him, that this was improper and scandalous and exactly the kind of thing that ruined a woman's reputation forever. She should have been sensible and cautious and all the things she had been raised to be. Instead, she said, "Yes." The house was indeed small, just a main room with a kitchen area and a separate bedroom, but it was clean and sturdy with real glass windows and a fireplace for cold nights. Lucas gave Dorothy the bedroom without question, making up a pallet for himself in the main room despite her protests. "You are not sleeping on the floor in your own house," Dorothy argued. "It is still better than the ground, and I have been sleeping on the ground for years." He grinned at her. "Besides, I am a gentleman, mostly." They settled into an easy routine. Lucas would leave early each morning to work on the ranch, coming back at sunset tired and dusty. Dorothy would spend the days cleaning the house, exploring Del Rio, and slowly building a new life from scratch. She found work doing laundry and sewing for some of the wealthier families in town, enjoying the independence of earning her own money for the first time in her life. In the evenings, they would cook dinner together, talking about their days and their pasts and their dreams for the future. Dorothy learned that Lucas could play the harmonica, that he was terrible at cards but loved to play anyway, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. Lucas learned that Dorothy could whistle better than most men, that she had a gift for numbers and could calculate sums in her head faster than he could with paper and pencil, that she sang when she thought no one was listening and had a voice like honey. Slowly, carefully, they circled around the growing attraction between them, a touch that lingered too long when passing dishes at dinner, eyes meeting across the room and holding, the awareness of each other's presence, even in silence. One evening, about 3 weeks after they had moved into the house, Dorothy was washing dishes while Lucas sat at the table mending a bridle. It had become her favorite time of day, this quiet companionship as the sun set outside their window. She was humming softly to herself when she felt him come up behind her. "Dorothy," he said quietly. She turned, her hands still wet from the dishwater, and found him closer than she expected. Close enough that she could see the silver flecks in his blue-gray eyes, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Yes, I need to tell you something." He took a breath. "I think I am falling in love with you." Dorothy's heart stopped, then started again, beating double time. "Lucas, I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I cannot help how I feel. Every morning I wake up and think about seeing you. Every day at the ranch, I am counting the hours until I can come home to you. Every night I lie awake in that other room and wish I was lying next to you instead." He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch impossibly gentle. "I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you standing in the rain, brave and stubborn and refusing to give up even when your whole world was falling apart." Dorothy could not speak past the lump in her throat. She raised her hand and placed it against his chest, feeling his heart pounding as hard as hers. "I thought it was just me," she whispered. "I thought I was alone in feeling this way. You are not alone. You will never be alone again if I have anything to say about it." His hand moved to cup her cheek. "Tell me to stop and I will. Tell me this is too fast and we will slow down. But if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, please, Dorothy, tell me." Instead of answering with words, Dorothy did something she had never done in her entire life. She stood on her toes and kissed him. For a moment Lucas froze, surprised, then his arms came around her and he kissed her back with a passion that made her knees weak. It was nothing like the chaste kisses she had shared with Thomas, all proper and restrained. This was fire and need and yearning. This was coming home after a long journey. This was right in a way nothing in her life had ever been right before. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "I will take that as a yes." Dorothy laughed, giddy and happy and more in love than she had known was possible. "Yes, yes, I love you too. I think I have loved you since you offered me your coat in the rain." They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other as the last light faded from the sky, and Dorothy thought about fate again. Maybe she did believe in it after all. Maybe everything had happened exactly the way it was supposed to. The pain and humiliation of being left at the altar leading her to this moment, this man, this love that felt big enough to hold the whole sky. Lucas pulled back just enough to look at her, his expression serious. "Marry me." Dorothy's eyes widened. "What? Marry me? For real this time, not because it is the practical thing or the sensible thing, but because I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." He took her hands in his. "I do not have much to offer. This house, my salary, a life that will probably be more work than comfort. But I promise I will love you every day for the rest of my life. I promise I will never leave you standing in the rain. I promise I will do everything in my power to make you happy." Dorothy thought about the wedding that never happened, about standing alone in her white dress waiting for a man who never came. Then she thought about Lucas riding up out of the storm, offering her a choice and a chance and ultimately his heart. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." This time when he kissed her, it felt like a promise. They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Del Rio. Dorothy wore a simple blue dress she had sewn herself. No veil, no elaborate decorations, just a few wildflowers in her hair. Lucas wore his best clothes, his face freshly shaved, his eyes never leaving hers throughout the entire ceremony. Patterson and his wife attended as witnesses. Along with a few of the ranch hands, Lucas had become friendly with. It was nothing like the wedding Dorothy had planned with Thomas. No big celebration or fancy breakfast or dozens of guests. But when the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife and Lucas kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache, Dorothy thought it was perfect. That night, in their small house that was now truly theirs, Lucas carried her over the threshold and into their bedroom. He set her down gently, his hands shaking slightly as he cupped her face. "Are you nervous?" Dorothy asked. "Terrified," he admitted. "I have waited for this moment for weeks, and now I am afraid I will do something wrong." Dorothy smiled and took his hands, placing them on her waist. "We will figure it out together." And they did. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, full of whispered words and gentle touches, and the joy of finally being together without barriers or hesitation. Lucas was patient and careful, making sure Dorothy felt safe and loved. And when they finally came together, it felt like the missing piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Afterwards, lying in his arms with her head on his chest and his fingers running through her hair, Dorothy felt a contentment she had never experienced before. This was what it was supposed to feel like, she realized. This sense of belonging, of being exactly where you were meant to be. "What are you thinking?" Lucas asked, his voice rumbling in his chest beneath her ear. "That I am grateful Thomas did not show up that day." Lucas laughed, a sound she had learned to love. "I am grateful too, though I do wonder sometimes what happened to him, why he ran off." "I do not care," Dorothy said honestly. "Whatever his reasons, they do not matter now. He gave me the greatest gift he could have, even if he did not mean to. He set me free to find this, to find you." Lucas tightened his arms around her. "I love you, Dorothy Kane. Dorothy Kane." She had a new name now, a new life, a new future that was nothing like the one she had planned. And it was better, so much better than anything she could have imagined. "I love you too," she whispered. "Always." The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. Money was tight sometimes, with Lucas's salary covering their basic needs but leaving little extra. Dorothy supplemented their income with her sewing and laundry work, taking pride in being able to contribute. They learned to compromise, to communicate, to navigate the small frictions that came from two people building a life together. Lucas taught Dorothy to ride properly, getting her a gentle mare named Daisy. They would go for rides on Sundays, their day off, exploring the countryside around Del Rio. Dorothy taught Lucas to appreciate books, reading aloud to him in the evenings from novels she borrowed from the small town library. They planted a vegetable garden behind their house, working side by side to coax beans and tomatoes and squash from the Texas soil. They made friends, becoming part of the community. Dorothy joined the ladies' sewing circle, though she never quite fit in with the women who had lived in Del Rio their whole lives. Lucas became respected at the ranch, known as a fair boss and a hard worker. Slowly, their house filled with small treasures, items they bought or made together that turned the bare rooms into a home. At night, they would lie in bed and talk about their dreams. Lucas wanted to eventually buy his own ranch, to build something that was truly theirs. Dorothy wanted to learn to read music, to maybe have a piano someday. They both wanted children, a family to fill the house with laughter and love. On their first anniversary, Lucas surprised Dorothy with a trip to San Antonio. They stayed in a nice hotel, ate at fancy restaurants, and spent 3 days just enjoying each other's company without the demands of work and daily life. On the last night, as they walked along the river, Lucas stopped and turned to Dorothy. "This year with you has been the happiest of my life," he said. "I wake up every morning and I cannot believe I am lucky enough to call you my wife." Dorothy reached up and kissed him. "I am the lucky one. Then we are both lucky." He pulled a small box from his pocket. "I know we did not have much when we got married. I could not afford a ring then. But I have been saving, and I wanted to give you this." Inside the box was a simple gold band with a small ruby. It was not fancy or expensive, but to Dorothy, it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Lucas," she breathed. "It is perfect." He slipped it onto her finger, next to the plain band he had given her on their wedding day. "I promise to keep working hard to keep building our life together. Someday I will buy you a big house and fancy dresses and anything else you want." "I do not need any of that," Dorothy said, meaning it. "I just need you." 2 years into their marriage, Dorothy discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but waited until she was sure before telling Lucas. She chose her moment carefully, waiting until they were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Lucas," she said, "I have something to tell you." He looked over at her, immediately picking up on the serious tone in her voice. "What is it?" "Are you all right?" "I am fine. Better than fine." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." For a moment Lucas just stared at her, processing the words. Then his face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight but carefully as if she was made of glass. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy, Dorothy, I am beyond happy. I am terrified and thrilled and I cannot wait." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes bright. "You are going to be a wonderful mother, and you will be a wonderful father." The pregnancy was not easy. Dorothy suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first few months, barely able to keep anything down. Lucas hovered over her constantly, worried and attentive, bringing her ginger tea and crackers and anything else that might help. As she grew bigger, the Texas heat became oppressive, and there were days when she could barely move from sheer exhaustion. But there were also moments of pure joy. The first time she felt the baby move, Lucas's face when he felt the kicks under his hand. The evening spent imagining what their child would look like and what they would name him or her. They prepared the house as best they could, turning a corner of their bedroom into a nursery with a cradle Lucas built himself. Dorothy went into labor on a hot August day, 9 months after discovering she was pregnant. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Lucas genuinely thought he might lose her. He held her hand through it all, ignoring the midwife's suggestion that he wait outside like most men did, refusing to leave Dorothy alone even for a moment. When their son finally entered the world screaming and red-faced and perfect, Lucas wept openly. He cut the cord with shaking hands, then watched as the midwife cleaned the baby and placed him in Dorothy's arms. "He is beautiful," Dorothy whispered, exhausted but glowing. "He looks like you." "He has your nose," Lucas said, touching the baby's tiny face with one finger. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at their son, Dorothy knew, "James, after my father, James Kane." Lucas smiled. "It is perfect." Being parents changed everything. Their quiet evenings became filled with crying and feeding and diaper changes. Sleep became a precious commodity, snatched in small increments between James's demands. Their carefully ordered life descended into controlled chaos. But it was also the best thing that had ever happened to them. Watching James grow, seeing his first smile, hearing his first laugh, these moments became more precious than gold. Lucas was a devoted father, coming home from long days at the ranch and immediately taking James so Dorothy could have a break. Dorothy discovered reserves of patience and love she never knew she possessed. James was 6 months old when Lucas came home one evening with news. "Patterson is retiring. He is selling the ranch." Dorothy looked up from where she was feeding James, alarm shooting through her. "Does that mean you will lose your job?" "No, not exactly." Lucas sat down at the table, his expression serious but with an undercurrent of excitement. "He offered to sell it to me." Dorothy stared at him. "The whole ranch?" The whole thing. Land, cattle, buildings, everything. He knows I have been saving, and he said he would rather sell to someone he knows will take care of it than to a stranger. Lucas leaned forward. Dorothy, this is our chance. We could own our own ranch, build something real for James, for any other children we might have. How much does he want for it? Lucas told her, and Dorothy's heart sank. It was more than they had, significantly more even with years of careful saving. We do not have enough. Not yet. But Patterson said he would hold it for me for 6 months, give me time to come up with the rest. There is a bank in San Antonio that might give me a loan. He reached across the table and took her hand. I know it is a risk. I know it means going into debt. But Dorothy, this is everything we have been working toward. Our own land, our own ranch, a legacy to leave our children. Dorothy thought about the life they had built together, about how far they had come from that rainy day in San Angelo 4 years ago. She thought about the girl who had stood at the altar waiting for a man who never came, and the woman she had become since then. Do it, she said. Take the risk. We will make it work. Lucas grinned and leaned over to kiss her, careful not to jostle James, who was falling asleep against Dorothy's shoulder. I love you. I love you too. Getting the loan was nerve-wracking. The banker in San Antonio looked at Lucas with skepticism, clearly doubtful that a ranch foreman could successfully run his own operation. But Lucas had prepared, bringing detailed records of Patterson's operation, projections for the future, and references from respected men in Del Rio. In the end, the banker agreed, though the interest rate made Dorothy wince. They finalized the sale on a clear day in October, gathering at the courthouse to sign papers that transferred ownership of the Patterson ranch to Lucas Kane. Patterson shook Lucas's hand, his eyes misty, and told him to take care of the land. Lucas promised he would. Walking out of the courthouse as a ranch owner felt surreal. Lucas stopped on the steps, Dorothy and James beside him, and just looked at the sky. We did it, he said quietly. You did it, Dorothy corrected. This was your dream. No, we did it. None of this would have happened without you. You believed in me when you had no reason to. You worked beside me, saved with me, supported me through everything. This ranch is as much yours as it is mine. Dorothy shifted James to her other hip and took Lucas's hand. Then I suppose we had better go look at our ranch. The ranch was beautiful, sprawling across hundreds of acres of Texas grassland. There was a main house, much larger than their little 2-room place, with a proper kitchen and multiple bedrooms and a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. There were barns and corrals and a bunkhouse for the ranch hands they would need to hire. There was a creek running through the property, providing water year-round. It also needed work. The house needed repairs, the fences needed mending, several of the outbuildings were falling apart. The cattle had been well managed but would need careful attention to build the herd back up. It was overwhelming and exciting all at once. They moved in a week later, filling the empty rooms slowly with their modest possessions. The house felt enormous after their small place, but Dorothy loved it immediately. She loved the big windows that let in light, loved the kitchen with its new stove, loved having a separate room for James. Lucas threw himself into the work with single-minded determination. He hired 3 ranch hands, men he had worked with before and trusted. He spent long hours in the saddle, checking fences and moving cattle and learning every inch of his land. He came home exhausted every night but happier than Dorothy had ever seen him. Dorothy worked just as hard, managing the house and James and starting a chicken coop and vegetable garden that would help them save money. She kept the books for the ranch, her gift for numbers proving invaluable as they tracked expenses and income and slowly, painfully slowly, began to see a profit. The first year as ranch owners was brutal. There were times when Dorothy was not sure they would make it, when the debt felt crushing and the work felt endless. They had to make hard decisions, cutting corners wherever they could, foregoing any luxuries, living on the edge of their means. But they also had each other. On the hardest days, when Lucas was ready to give up, Dorothy would remind him of how far they had come. When Dorothy was overwhelmed, Lucas would take over with James and the house, letting her rest. They worked as a team, each supporting the other, their love the foundation that held everything else together. Slowly, things improved. The ranch began to turn a profit. They were able to hire another ranch hand, then another. The debts began to shrink. Dorothy became pregnant again, and while the timing was not ideal, they both welcomed the news with joy. Their daughter was born on a spring morning 2 years after James. The labor was faster this time and easier, and when the midwife placed the baby in Dorothy's arms, she felt her heart expand impossibly larger. "A girl," Lucas said, his voice full of wonder. "We have a daughter." They named her Sarah after Lucas's mother. She had Dorothy's dark hair and Lucas's blue-gray eyes, and from the moment she was born, she had both of them wrapped around her tiny finger. James adored his baby sister, wanting to help with everything even though he was only 2. Dorothy would find him sitting by her cradle, singing the songs she sang, his small face serious with concentration. It made her heart ache with love. Life on the ranch fell into a new rhythm. The days were full of work and children and 1,000 small demands, but they were also full of laughter and love, and the deep satisfaction of building something together. Dorothy would stand on the porch sometimes, watching Lucas work with the horses while James tried to imitate him and Sarah slept in her arms, and think about how different her life was from what she had imagined. Better. It was so much better. 5 years after buying the ranch, Lucas and Dorothy hosted their first big gathering. They had finally paid off the loan, a milestone that called for celebration. They invited all their friends from Del Rio, the ranch hands and their families, Patterson and his wife, even the banker from San Antonio who had given them the loan. Dorothy cooked for days, preparing enough food to feed an army. Lucas butchered a steer and set up a spit for roasting. They hung lanterns around the porch and in the trees, creating a warm glow as the sun set. It was a perfect evening. People ate and danced and celebrated with them, toasting their success and the future. James, now 7, ran wild with the other children. Sarah, 5 and already showing signs of her mother's stubborn independence, held court with the adults who doted on her. As the party wound down and people began to leave, Lucas found Dorothy standing alone near the barn, looking out over their land. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About a wedding that never happened. About a man who left me standing in the rain. About a stranger who rode up and asked me to come with him." She turned in his arms to face him. "About how every terrible thing that happened led me here to this life to you." Lucas kissed her soft and sweet. "Do you have any regrets?" "Not a single one." "Good, because I have something to tell you," he grinned, that boyish expression she loved. "I have been talking to some of the other ranchers. There is some land adjacent to ours that is going up for sale. If we can buy it, we would double our acreage." Dorothy laughed. "You want to expand. We only just paid off the loan for this place." I know. "But Dorothy, we are successful now. We have built something real. Why not keep building?" He grew serious. "I want to leave something for our children, something that will last generations. The Kane Ranch, a legacy." Dorothy thought about James and Sarah, about the children they might still have, about grandchildren and great-grandchildren working this land. She thought about the life she and Lucas had built from nothing, from a moment of chance and courage and love. "All right," she said. "Let us do it. Let us keep building." They bought the additional land, expanding the ranch and their operations. They hired more hands, built more structures, grew the cattle herd. The Kane Ranch became known throughout the region as well-run and prosperous. Lucas became a respected figure in the community. His opinion sought on everything from cattle prices to local politics. Dorothy continued to manage the books and the household, but she also began to involve herself in the community in other ways. She started a school for the ranch children, teaching them reading and arithmetic in the mornings before they went to help with chores. She organized the ladies of Del Rio to raise money for a new church. She became known as a woman who got things done. They had 2 more children, another boy and another girl, born 3 years apart. William arrived when James was 10 and Sarah was 8, a surprise that nevertheless fit perfectly into their family. Lily came when Dorothy was 34, and the midwife warned her that this should probably be her last. Dorothy agreed, feeling complete with 4 children, a loving husband, and a life beyond her wildest dreams. The years passed in a blur of work and love and the ordinary miracles of daily life. James grew into a serious young man who shared his father's love of the land and his mother's head for business. Sarah became a skilled rider who could work cattle as well as any ranch hand. William was quiet and thoughtful, more interested in books than ranching but devoted to his family nonetheless. Lily was the baby, spoiled by her older siblings and parents alike, with a sunny disposition that brought joy to everyone around her. Lucas Gray at the temples, his face weathered by sun and wind, but to Dorothy he was just as handsome as the day he rode up in the rain. Dorothy's dark hair developed silver streaks, and lines appeared around her eyes and mouth, marks of laughter and worry and years well lived. On their 20th anniversary, Lucas planned a surprise. He hired someone to watch the children and took Dorothy to the same hotel in San Antonio where they had stayed on their first anniversary. Over dinner, he presented her with a small velvet box. Inside was a necklace, a delicate gold chain with a pendant shaped like a raindrop, a small diamond in the center catching the light. "I saw it and thought of that day," Lucas said. "The day everything changed, the rain that brought us together." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "Lucas, it is beautiful. Not as beautiful as you, not as beautiful as the life we have built together." He reached across the table and took her hand, his grip still strong despite the calluses and scars of decades of ranch work. "20 years ago, I saw a woman standing in the rain and I took a chance. Best decision I ever made." "I took a chance too," Dorothy reminded him, "getting on that horse with a stranger. We have taken a lot of chances together over the years, and I would take every single one again." Dorothy touched the raindrop pendant, feeling the weight of it against her skin. "I love you, Lucas Kane. Today, tomorrow, always." "Always," he echoed and kissed her hand. James married at 22, bringing home a sweet-natured girl named Margaret from a neighboring ranch. They built a house on the Kane property, and within a year, Dorothy was a grandmother. Holding her first grandchild, a boy they named Lucas after his grandfather, Dorothy felt the circle of life complete itself in the most beautiful way. Sarah shocked everyone by announcing at 19 that she was not interested in marriage, that she wanted to help run the ranch instead. Lucas and Dorothy supported her decision, even though it scandalized some of the more traditional members of the community. Sarah proved herself more than capable, managing aspects of the operation that allowed Lucas to finally slow down a bit. William went to college in Austin, something that filled Dorothy with pride even as she missed him terribly. He came home during breaks full of ideas and stories, and Dorothy loved listening to him talk about his studies. Lily grew into a beautiful young woman who loved music and art, and Dorothy finally bought that piano she had dreamed about all those years ago, filling the house with melodies. Lucas and Dorothy settled into the comfortable rhythms of middle age. They still worked, but they also made time to simply enjoy each other and the life they had built. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over land that belonged to them and their children, and talk about everything and nothing. One evening, when Dorothy was 48 and Lucas was 52, they were sitting in their usual spots when Lucas grew quiet. Dorothy glanced over at him, noting the thoughtful expression on his face. "What is it?" she asked. "I was just thinking about the Patterson place before it was ours, how it seemed so big and impossible back then." He smiled. "Now I look around and I cannot believe what we have accomplished. This ranch, our children, grandchildren, all of it started with a crazy decision to ask a woman in a wedding dress to run away with me." Dorothy laughed. "It was a crazy decision. I still cannot believe I said yes." "I am glad you did." Lucas reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "If I had that moment to live over again, knowing everything that would come after, all the hard work and worry and challenges, I would still stop. I would still ask you to come with me, and I would still say yes." Dorothy squeezed his hand, every time without hesitation. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out, still holding hands after all these years, still in love in a way that went bone deep and soul deep, forged through struggle and triumph, and the simple decision to choose each other every single day. As Dorothy grew older, she sometimes thought about Thomas Carver, wondered what had become of him. She heard through the grapevine years ago that he had married someone else, had moved to California, had made a decent life for himself. She bore him no ill will. In a strange way, she was grateful to him for his cowardice that day, for setting in motion the events that led her to Lucas. She never regretted the life she did not live, the safe, predictable existence she would have had as Mrs. Thomas Carver. Instead, she had adventure and passion, and a love story that would have seemed impossible if someone had told her about it that rainy day in San Angelo. The Kane Ranch prospered through the years, growing into one of the most successful operations in the region. Lucas and Dorothy eventually handed over day-to-day management to James and Sarah, though they both remained active and involved well into their 60s. They took pride in watching their children run the ranch, in seeing the next generation take what they had built and make it even better. William became a lawyer, returning to Del Rio to practice, and becoming an advocate for the small ranchers and farmers in the region. He married a fellow lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Catherine, and they had 3 children who loved visiting the ranch and hearing stories about their grandparents' adventures. Lily married a musician, much to everyone's surprise, and they traveled for a few years before settling in San Antonio, where Lily opened a music school. She brought her husband and eventually her 2 daughters to visit often, filling the ranch house with music and laughter. Lucas and Dorothy's love became legendary in Del Rio. People would point them out when they came to town, still holding hands after 40 years of marriage, still looking at each other with obvious affection. Young couples would ask them for advice, and Lucas and Dorothy would always say the same thing: choose each other every day, even when it is hard. Especially when it is hard. On their 50th anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. All 4 children were there with their spouses and children, along with friends from across the region, ranch hands past and present, and what seemed like half the population of Del Rio. Dorothy wore a new dress in pale blue. Lucas a suit he complained made him look like he was going to a funeral. James stood up to give a toast, his voice thick with emotion as he talked about his parents, about the love and legacy they had built. My father rode up to a chapel in the rain and asked my mother to take a chance on him. She said yes, and that yes changed everything. It gave us this family, this ranch, this life. So here is to taking chances. Here is to saying yes. And here is to 50 more years of the greatest love story I have ever known. Everyone cheered and raised their glasses. Dorothy wiped tears from her eyes while Lucas kissed her temple, his arm tight around her waist. Late that night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Lucas and Dorothy walked out to the spot where they could see the most stars. Dorothy leaned against her husband, feeling the solid warmth of him, still strong despite his 76 years. 50 years, she said softly. That is a long time. Not long enough, Lucas replied. I could spend 50 more with you and it still would not be enough. You old romantic. Only with you. He turned her to face him, cupping her face in his weathered hands. Thank you, Dorothy Kane, for saying yes that day. For taking a chance on a stranger, for building this life with me. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Dorothy rose on her toes, not as easy as it once was, and kissed him. And you are the best thing that ever happened to me, my cowboy who rode up in the rain and saved me. You saved yourself. I just offered you the horse. They laughed together, the sound carrying across the quiet land, and stood under the Texas stars that had watched over their love story for 5 decades. Lucas passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 79, Dorothy beside him as she had been for 53 years. The entire region mourned him, remembering a man who had been fair and kind and devoted to his family above all else. Dorothy held together through the funeral, accepting condolences with grace, but inside she felt like something fundamental had broken. For weeks, she wandered the ranch like a ghost, unable to find purpose or joy in anything. Her children worried, gathering around her with love and support, but nothing seemed to help. She had been part of a unit for so long, had built every part of her adult life around Lucas, that she did not know how to exist without him. One morning, she found herself standing on the porch at dawn, watching the sun rise over the land they had built together. She was wearing one of Lucas's old shirts, breathing in the faint scent of him that still clung to the fabric. The raindrop necklace hung around her neck as it had every day since he gave it to her. I do not know how to do this without you, she whispered to the empty air. But even as she said it, she felt something shift inside her. Lucas would not want her to fade away, to let grief consume her. He would want her to live, to find joy again, to be there for their children and grandchildren. He had spent his whole life taking care of her, loving her, building a future for her. The least she could do was honor that by continuing to live that future, even if he was not physically beside her. So Dorothy began to heal. Slowly, painfully, she found her way back to life. She spent time with her grandchildren, teaching them about their grandfather, keeping his memory alive through stories. She worked with Sarah and James on the ranch, contributing what she could. She went to Lily's music school and listened to the students perform. She visited William and talked politics and law. And every evening, she would sit on the porch in her usual spot, the chair next to her empty but not forgotten, and watch the sun set over Cane Land. She would talk to Lucas as if he was still there, telling him about her day, about the children, about the ranch. She wore her wedding rings and the raindrop necklace, physical reminders of a love that death could not diminish. Dorothy lived to be 87 years old, sharp and active until the very end. She passed away surrounded by her children and grandchildren, her hand resting on the arm of Lucas's empty chair. Her last words were, I am coming, my love. Wait for me." They buried her next to Lucas on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky so big and blue, it seemed to go on forever. The entire community came to pay their respects to a woman who had been a pillar of strength, a devoted mother and grandmother, and one half of a love story that had inspired generations. James stood at her grave after everyone had left, Sarah beside him, both of them crying openly. "Do you think they are together now?" Sarah asked. "I do not think I know," James replied. "Their love was too strong for something like death to break it." The Kane Ranch continued to prosper under the care of Lucas and Dorothy's descendants. The house they had built together stood strong, filled with new generations of children and laughter and love. The land they had worked so hard to acquire and maintain became a legacy that would last long after they were gone. And on rainy days, when the clouds rolled in and the drops started to fall, those who lived on the ranch would sometimes swear they could see two figures on the porch, sitting side by side, holding hands and watching the storm together. Whether it was real or just imagination or wishful thinking, no one could say for certain. But everyone agreed that if love could transcend death, if two souls could find each other across the vast expanse of eternity, it would be Lucas and Dorothy Kane, the cowboy who rode up in the rain, the bride who was brave enough to say yes. Together forever, as they always should be, as they always would be. Their love story became legend in Del Rio, told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. But those who had known them, who had seen them together over the decades, knew the truth was even better than the legend. They had taken a terrible moment and turned it into something beautiful. They had chosen each other in a storm and never stopped choosing each other. Through all the storms that followed, the raindrop necklace was passed down through the family, given to the granddaughter who most embodied Dorothy's spirit of courage and determination. With it came the story of how it came to be, of a 20th anniversary, and a man who never forgot the day rain brought him the love of his life. And in the end, that was the truest legacy Lucas and Dorothy Kane left behind. Not the ranch, not the money, not even the family, though all of those mattered. Their real legacy was the proof that love, true love, was worth any risk. That taking a chance on someone could change your entire life. That saying yes to adventure, to possibility, to a stranger offering his hand in the rain, could lead to happiness beyond imagination. The wedding that never happened in San Angelo, Texas, became the beginning of a marriage that lasted a lifetime and beyond. The cowboy who rode up at just the right moment became the love of a lifetime. And the woman who was brave enough to climb on that horse and ride into an uncertain future became the heart of a family that would span generations. It was a love story for the ages, set against the backdrop of the wild Texas landscape, forged in struggle and triumph, and ultimately transcending even death itself. It was real and messy and beautiful and perfect in its imperfection. It was, in every sense of the word, a life well lived and a love well loved. And that, in the end, was all anyone could ask for.